Hello friends, family, team. Welcome to this very special episode of Pivotal Slice. Relax, enjoy, take a breath, take a moment, have some peace, spend some time with us. It's a great privilege for me to introduce our special guest today, Jade Green. Growing up as an only child with a single mother who suffered complex mental health issues, Jade gravitated towards writing as a way of understanding the world and her place in it. She loved to read and was always writing stories, but fell out of practice when she entered secondary school and experienced severe bullying. Depression and anxiety followed Jade into her 20s. Then she learned to meditate, which sparked the urge to get back in touch with her creative self. Through writing, she found a way to cope with the emotions and past trauma from which she had disassociated for so long. For Jade, writing is an extension of her spiritual journey, and by putting her work out into the world, she hopes to empower and inspire other women to pursue their creative path. Since finding her way back to creativity, Jade has had short stories published in Bare Fiction, Litro, Storgy, and Oculum. This year, she has written her second novel, Now I Am a Lake, which is based around 3 generations of women coming face to face with their unresolved traumas throughout 3 separate timelines. Jade's writing has a strong feminist focus, and she likes to explore the heroine's journey, focusing on relationships between mothers and daughters and the female pursuit of artistic freedom.
The actual writing theoretically is the fun part, the juicy part, the creative part. And all the stuff that comes before it, like the preparation and the outlining and the research, is, well, I find it really boring and difficult and like the not fun part. So there's a temptation to just dive in and start writing when you're not ready. And so you have to train yourself to kind of resist that temptation. So I definitely didn't get this right with my first novel because I just spent so much time agonizing over how to do it, and how to structure it. I didn't really have a solid method down, and I wasn't disciplined enough to be setting myself deadlines at that point. So I kind of, wasted years just trying to figure out how to do it. So this time around, for this second novel, I've set myself much stricter deadlines. So I gave myself a month of preparation time. And
what did you do in the month that you spent just preparing then? What does that look like? What sort of things were you doing?
Mainly I was structuring. So I interviewed some people as part of the process, and I used those interviews, and because this is kind of based around real people, I used the dates of when they were alive and key events that happened. I use those dates as markers around which to structure the rest of the novel. So yeah, the interviewing was part of the prep, the structuring. The structure is so important because you really need that as a map going into the writing, otherwise you'll just get lost. So most of the time it's focused on that. I just work on it a little bit every day, even though it's really hard. I find it really hard, and I listened to an interview with Charlie Brooker recently, and he said that the outlining part is like you're going on holiday, but someone is making you sit down and write an itinerary in, excruciating detail, outlining what you're going to do every day. And it's like you might not know what you want to do on the 8th day because, you might be tired by that point, but you've still got to force yourself to write this really detailed itinerary before you're allowed to go on the holiday. I thought that was a really good way of explaining what it's like to outline, and for me anyway.
Mental preparation to be prepared in your mind to feel relaxed enough when you're in day 8 that you might not do what you planned on day 8, but you've thought about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. You've made some decisions, because if you don't have that, then skipping ahead a bit to one of the other questions, but if you don't do that, then you will end up getting blocked, because you'll get to a point and you'll think, oh God, I don't know what to do here. I haven't planned this. So what the hell am I doing? And then that fear will start to set in, and then you'll just get blocked. So it's a way of just avoiding writer's block by doing as much outlining as you can. Of course, there's no way to know exactly what's going to happen. On day 7, you might, find a tangent that's really exciting and fresh and that you could never have thought up in the outlining stage. And that's fine. But as long as you're working within the boundaries of that structure.
Interesting. And if we can just back up as well. So before you've gone into this month of preparation, I'm imagining that you came to some kind of conclusion on the idea and for the book, and also the intention of the book, and why you're doing the book. So this stuff came before you started process, right? So if we could just talk a little bit about that, when you got the idea for the book, the initial idea, and why it was an important thing for you.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about the idea stage of this, because I think a lot of people don't realise, when you hear people say I wrote a novel in 6 weeks, they might have been thinking about that novel, and that idea might have been growing in their mind for 2 years prior to that. So there's a whole lot of time. I mean, I think I've been thinking about this book for years, probably, not consciously, but it was there. I had an idea that I wanted to write something like this with 3 separate timelines, based loosely around my own family history. But it wasn't until I got the kind of inspiration to then turn it into a feasible plan of a novel.
So what was the inspiration?
It was actually an episode of BoJack Horseman, which is one of my favourite TV shows. I think it's one of the best written TV shows of recent times. But there's an episode where you're a split between BoJack and his kind of dysfunction in the present day, and his mother's life, and that involves his grandparents also, and you're kind of cutting in and out of those timelines. And it's not like that's a new idea, that's been done a million times in books and films and everything, but I think just the way it was realised, and I love the balance of humour and drama in BoJack, and I wanted to get something like that for this novel. So yeah, that was the flash of inspiration, oh okay, I can kind of see how I can do this now.
Awesome. So that was a kind of piece of the puzzle that brought together the worlds that had been evolving in your imagination and your thought process over a long period of time. And when that piece came along, it sounds like you were like, okay, I know how to do this now.
Exactly. And you can never anticipate when that piece is going to come along or where it's going to come from. I didn't sit down with that episode of BoJack expecting to do like research for a novel or anything. I was just, my mind was kind of idle, just watching TV, and then it's like, bam, there it is. And that can happen at any moment. I think any creative person will tell you that. It's usually when your mind is kind of in a bit of a resting state that you just suddenly get the idea, and then you don't even have to act on that idea immediately. You can let it just grow into its own thing in the back of your mind, and like I said, that can take any amount of time. It can take years or weeks, but that's a really important part of the process, is just letting it grow before you start then sitting down and trying to plan it out, because if you do that prematurely, then it will just fall apart.
Awesome. So the pieces have come together. You know how you're going to do it, and you know what the themes are and the characters. And I mean, I'm imagining that there's a lot that you don't know exactly as well, right? At this stage, you're ready to do it, but there's still a lot of unknown exactly, or do you know precisely how the stories are going to unfold over the course of the book, or is there still gems of insight that is needed to paste the composition together in the writing process? How much do you not know when you start writing?
I mean, for me, I would say like 80% of it comes together in the first draft. You can only really know a very small tip of the iceberg when you're going in, but you want to try and like get as much out of your mind and out of the concept, obviously, when you're doing the outline. But for me, like characters, especially when I sit down to write the first draft, I only have very vague sketches of what the characters are like, and it's not until I start writing in each character's voice that I can really understand who they are. So that's a big one for me, is characters, and that's one thing I'm sort of trying to get better at, is understanding the characters a bit better before I start. That's one of those areas that's kind of a bit iffy for me sometimes. And
is it sort of getting to know the characters, and then the characters speak to you? I mean, obviously, big Project Runway fan. As are you, I'm not afraid to admit it.
Shameless.
It's great. It's just such a great program on the creative process. But they do say how when they go into mood and they're picking their fabrics, the fabric speaks to them. It communicates to them what it needs. And I'm just sort of like drawing a parallel here to character writing. And is that a similar kind of experience? Do you find that this character grows in its own dimension, and then you're able to view the character, the character can then communicate what it needs to you, and then you can develop it that way? Is it something like that?
I mean, yeah, for this novel I used the Saboteurs, which is like this online questionnaire you can take to find out what your biggest saboteurs are. So, for example, you might have a tendency to be a victim or an avoider. You might avoid certain things, or a high achiever. It's just like your biggest kind of mechanisms for coping with day-to-day life that they've developed in your childhood.
There's a book, right? Positive Intelligence.
Positive Intelligence, yeah.
Amazing book. Everyone should read that book.
Incredible. It is incredible, yeah. It's been very influential on me. And so I kind of use that as a starting point for each of my characters, like what are their biggest saboteurs. And that was quite useful, and helped me to arrive at the characters a bit more quickly. But I mean, sometimes I'll get to the end of a first draft and still feel like I don't fully know a character. It can just take a while, I think, to really tap into who they are. So that's one of the things that comes later on for me with characters. I think for me, like when I'm starting out, it's more the world that they live in that is like the material that speaks to me. The world that they live in, what drives them, you know, what they do, and things like that. More of a kind of external, and you know, the society that they live in. And that was a big part of this novel because I was writing it one timeline in the 50s, one in the 90s, and one in the present day. So society was a big driving factor in that, and like the role of family, and yeah, the restrictions placed on women, and things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And because we are products of our environment, of you know, where we are culturally and geographically, and you know, what our family dysfunctional systems are like, and that really affects one's personality. And like, you know, we're just watching a new season of Dexter, and there's this really awful line in it, which is this really kind of ridiculous belief, I think, that people are just born that way. I think Dexter talks about his son and just says, oh well, he was born that way. It's such a load of horse crap. That's it's like you're not born, you know, I mean, there's obviously there is genetic traits, but you know, it's all learned. Like fear is, you know, you're only born with two fears. One is falling and one is loud sounds. It's like everything else is learned. It's all conditioned, right?
Yeah, well, that was definitely a big part of this novel because, you know, it's not just our childhood that causes these mechanisms to develop and causes, you know, the dysfunction. It's not like you're just taking on your parents' dysfunction. You're taking on your grandparents' dysfunction as well, and like their parents, and it, you know, it can go back generations. So that's what I wanted to explore with this, is like, okay, how can like one person not dealing with their shit in 1956 affect me right now in 2021, or nearly 2022?
Yeah, it's an important question, because I think we all assume that the way that we see the world is our own. But if you actually pull back the curtain on that and you start to question, then you start to realize that, oh, well, actually, we've been conditioned since we were brought into this world by the people around us and our parents. And like you say, our parents were conditioned by their parents, and their parents were conditioned by their parents. And
yeah, it's like one of those Russian dolls.
Yeah, well put. So obviously this is a bit of a realization for you personally. So I guess, like, how has writing the book, the experience of writing the book, doing the research, looking into your family history and thinking about, you know, your beliefs and where they come from, how has this affected you and your life and your perception of the world?
Well, in a way, it's been, you know, very therapeutic to delve into this stuff. And I think it's been a way of understanding my own mental health issues, you know. I've dealt with like anxiety since I was a teenager. And I was depressed as well for a big chunk of time. And I think for many artists, expressing themselves creatively is like the one kind of outlet for them. It's the way they've found to understand themselves, and that's definitely true of me, because I think with my first novel I was using writing kind of as a way of escaping, and it's quite an escapist novel, you know. It's a sci-fi, it's very removed from my reality, and I think back when I wrote that, I was definitely using writing as more of like an escape. Whereas with this novel, it feels more like a way to express all of these difficulties and yeah, like explore myself and do that kind of, you know, I've been doing a lot of deep work on myself this year, and the novel is just an extension of that, I think.
Fascinating. And I guess this is something that you can offer to your audience, right, is that they'll get a taste of that experience through the story for themselves, and bring awareness of some of these really important subjects to people. And what is your hope for the future? Now becoming aware of these important things, what would your hope be for people engaging with your work? What would you like them to take away from it for their own lives, and what sort of change would you want to see in the world that could really benefit people?
Well, I think looking within is really important, and doing this kind of work on yourself, because we live in a very unconscious world, where people are just replaying patterns and not really examining the ways that they've been conditioned. And I think it's the source of all of the hatred, all the division, just all of the terrible stuff in the world. So raising the level of consciousness in people, and maybe helping them realize that, this mechanism that I've been playing out in my adult life came from this point in my childhood, and I don't have to be controlled by it anymore. I have the choice to wake up, and it's a really amazing realization, like, oh wait a minute, I don't have to live this way. I don't have to be a people pleaser. I don't have to avoid things. It's going to be scary and uncomfortable, but I actually have the choice to go in another direction and create my own reality, and live exactly the way that I want to live, and it's hugely liberating. So I hope people will gain a little speck of that feeling of freedom that I've felt from waking up from all this stuff and doing this work.
Powerful. So let's go back to the process. So we've talked a bit about the conception of the idea and how that came together, and then we've touched a little bit on your month of preparation. You mentioned that you did interviews, and perhaps you did some research and reading, I'm imagining, and then what? So you've got a structure in mind. I'm guessing you've got material, you've got interviews, and you're ready to write. So what does that look like then? So you've done the month, and you're like, right, sit down, and then what then?
So it's important that you wait to sit down and write the first draft for as long as you possibly can, until it's the story is bursting out of you. I think that's quite important. And the more preparation you can cram into that allotted time that you've given yourself to prepare, I think the more it will be bursting out of you, and the more you'll want to be dying to sit down and start writing. And that's important, because I think when you actually do come to sit down and write a first draft, especially of a novel, because it's so huge and overwhelming, there's always going to be, I think, a bit of resistance. And you hear writers talk about this a lot, where just actually sitting down, opening the Word document and starting to write, as excited as you are about the story, there's still going to be just this kind of what's the word for
overwhelm?
Yeah, or when two magnets are
resistance.
Yeah, a resistance to actually sitting down and doing it. I don't know if it's fear or what, but I think it's just the prospect of all the work that you've got ahead of you is scary, and so as prepared as you think you are, and as excited as you think you are, there's going to be a time when you come and sit down and think, right, okay, I'm going to start that first draft today, and then this feeling is going to set in, oh shit, do I actually know what I'm doing? And then at that point, there's a huge temptation to go and do some more prep. And then that preparation can just turn into procrastination. And I know writers who've, gone into this pit of what they think is preparation, but they're just delaying the actual sitting down to write. And so it's really important to be aware of that when you come to write the first draft. And you'll get a bit of that every day that you do it. I mean, in my experience, actually in the Bill Oakley interview that we did, he said every day is like getting into a freezing cold bath. And, he's been working for decades. He's a really seasoned TV writer, but he still has that resistance to actually just doing it. So yeah, just be really aware of that. And if you've built the structure and you've got that map really solid, then it should be a bit easier, because every day you can set yourself a small goal of like, right, today I need to get this character from the car and up to that meeting that they have with their boss. So what's the most interesting way I can get from this point to that point? And then that will be, the minimum for today. Or you might want to do it in a word count kind of scenario. So set yourself, a writing teacher once told me that 300 words a day is a good one to set yourself, especially if you're just starting out, because 300 words is easy. Like, it will take you probably half an hour, and it's not even a full page of writing, but it's easy. And that's really important, because it's like you'll get to that 300 words and you'll probably be thinking, oh, okay, I'm kind of feeling good about this now, I'll just do a bit more. And then you might end up writing 1,000 words that day. So I think, setting yourself just small achievable targets each day is really important, because if you go in thinking, right, I'm going to write the first chapter today, you're just going to trip up like immediately, and you're just going to feel like a failure before you've even started, because it's a lot. It's just a lot when you've got all of that prep on your mind as well, to just get like swamped in all of that left brain kind of thinking. And I think to get to the right brain part of being in flow, you need to just go easy on yourself, especially at the beginning. And just set those achievable targets. And it's very similar to running, actually. And I'll probably keep coming back to this analogy of running, because I think it's a useful one to use, and it's probably the reason I like running so much, is because it is so much like writing for me. When you're just starting out running, it's horrible and it's painful, and your muscles aren't used to it, and your joints just feel like they're gonna shatter at any moment, and you can barely breathe because your lungs aren't used to it yet. And so you need to just set yourself a small target. Okay, I'm going to run for 5 minutes today. And it's just the act of actually getting out there and doing it that's the important part. It's not how far you run or how many words you write. It's just doing it. Okay, I'm going to do something today. I'll write just one sentence today. I'll get out there and run for a minute. It's just the actual doing it and making a habit of it. Okay, I'll do that today, and then tomorrow I'll do the same. And then the next day I might just push myself a little bit further. And it's just, this balance of going easy on yourself and just being strict on yourself to get out there and just do it each day. I don't write every day, though. I write 4 days a week, and that's kind of my deal with myself. The routine is a very important part of it.
So you start, I mean, that's good advice, start simple, start in a place that you know that you can do what you've allocated for yourself in the day easily, and then you get the dopamine, right? You get the feeling of doing something. I suppose the opposite of that, going back to BoJack, is like when he's really unhappy with the ghostwriter that wrote his biography, so he decides to do it himself in 5 days and takes like massive amounts of pharmaceutical drugs, and goes into sort of a some kind of paranoid delusional state, and basically hands in this really bizarre novel with like recipes for vegan food and YouTube links, and then he feels like a complete failure.
Basically everything that BoJack does is the wrong way to do it. I think you could say that about the whole show. Like, the way he does life is just the opposite of what you should do. I think it's really important that you go easy on yourself, and you also just allow yourself to write badly, because that first draft is going to be bad, and there's no getting around that. And I think that's so hard for a lot of writers to deal with, because you're just coming face to face with how shit your writing is every day for however long it takes you to write the first draft. I mean, I think it took me about 5 months to write the first draft of Now I'm a Lake. So it's a big lesson in getting over your ego, because we, as artists and writers especially, we just want to believe that we're great, and our writing is great, and it's going to come out great. It's going to just come out exactly the way we envisioned it for all those years of thinking about the idea and turning it around in our heads. And it's not going to come out like that. Like, it's going to be shit. It's going to look like shit. And that's true of all writers, like even the most seasoned writers, even, the most highly paid writers have to get past that bad first draft. And I think that's what trips a lot of writers up, and prevents them from even sitting down at the computer to write. It's like, it's just going to be bad, and I want it to be good, and it's not.
Yeah, that's the ego, right? The frontal cortex, the voice, the judge. Going back again to the positive intelligence book, which is just a must-read recommendation on this show, I think, because we're always going to come back to that. And to an extent, I think reading that book for me gave myself some separation from those voices, right? So it's like, we all have that judge voice in our head that says, you are nothing, you are worthless, you're not lovable, your work is terrible. And for me, realizing that voice isn't me, and that's a conditioned societal voice, has been gold, because you remove yourself from that. It's like, that is not me. That is a voice that has been manufactured by our conditioned reality. So I think that's really amazing that you're able to remove yourself from those voices, because essentially those voices stop the creativity, they stop the flow, they stop you from doing it, they make you give up. And it's fear, right? Like you were saying, it's fear of failure, right? Because you don't want to be a failure. And if there's lots of people will never finish anything. I mean, I've met so many people that are like that. They'll start like loads of different projects, loads of different things in loads of different areas, and they just never go anywhere with it. And it's like, it's just kind of this fear of failure, right? Because it's like we're all scared of being judged.
Yeah, and I think as well as fear of failure, it's to do with this conditioning that we have of looking at the end result of something and comparing your crappy first draft to someone else's end result that they've probably spent years of their life editing, and they've probably had, you know, a team of editors and a publisher also weighing in to make it the best version that it can possibly be. And you're looking at your crappy first draft and thinking, well, why isn't this like this book that I love? You know, why isn't my prose like that? And I think that is a cultural thing as well. You know, when we're scrolling through social media and we're only seeing people's achievements or people's holidays that they're going on or people's amazing houses that they've been able to buy, and it's like, oh, why can't I do that? You know, why doesn't my life look like that? But you're not seeing all of the hard work and the sacrifice that has come before that end result. So I do think it's a cultural thing of like this obsession with the end result of things being the way that life is, and it's just not like that. But yeah, it's fear and putting pressure on yourself early on. And again, going back to the running analogy, you wouldn't go out on your very first run and expect to be able to run a marathon. You know, you have to spend years building up to that and getting your body used to it and getting your muscles, you know, strong enough to be able to endure that distance. And it's exactly the same with writing a novel. You know, you don't just sit down like Bojack does with his laptop and expect to write a memoir in 5 days, because it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I guess our ego protects us, right? So like because of fear, I'm just like thinking of traits that stop people from doing things. It's like you know, this idea that I am great already, like, you know, and then when you go to do something you realize that you're not great. It's like, oh no, I'm not great, and then you just don't do anything, right?
Yeah, it bursts the bubble, doesn't it, of your ego, your like nice familiar little ego world that tells you that you're great and talented, you know. And I think that's such a poisonous word, talent, because, you know, I used to have people telling me that I was a good writer, even when I was a kid, because I used to write stories when I was younger. I was always writing stories, and I would be praised for it, and, you know, my English teachers would love me. And so I think when I started writing again, you know, my mid-20s, I went into it with this expectation of like, oh yeah, I'm a great writer. People have always told me I'm a great writer, and, you know, that's just ego. And so then when my writing was terrible, it was just shattering, because it was like, why isn't this good? You know, why am I not living up to those people who told me what a great writer I am? Like, I didn't realize that I would have to start all over again, you know, building it up in stages and learning a lot more lessons before it would be anywhere near good, you know. And it's still not great, you know, it's still not as great as I want it to be. I mean, Malcolm Gladwell says that you have to put 10,000 hours of work in before you master anything, and I'm nowhere near 10,000 hours, so I've got a long way to go still. Yeah, and
I think the development part of a creative person is the work, you know, because it's this journey of overcoming, right, that is so pervasive in stories. Like a couple of things for me, like film stories, is like Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan and Whiplash, because they're both stories about overcoming obstacles in order to achieve greatness, and really, you know, instead of waiting to do the 10,000 hours and then you do the work, it's like, no, like the work is always ongoing. And even when you've done the 10,000 hours, you still got a lifetime as well. I think it's a good analogy though for sport and, well, for any creative endeavor. But I do think that work is always relevant no matter when it's done. I mean, if you look at a child, and how artistic children are, you know, they haven't done 10,000 hours. They don't need to do 10,000 hours. Their work is still beautiful, and it still takes you there to that place because it's the human experience, and it's honest and it's raw, and sometimes not having that that time with the craft can work to its advantage as well, I think. So
well, I think when you're a child, those voices in your head, those saboteurs, haven't developed yet, and so you are a bit more free to just be raw and honest and just create work that's completely free, because you don't have 1,000 voices in your head going, this is shit, what are you doing, who are you?
Yeah, you haven't gone to school.
Stupid
yet.
Piece of shit.
You haven't been you haven't been beat down by your teachers yet. You haven't been beat down by your parents yet. You haven't had the crap beaten out of you repeatedly for years and years and years at that point of being a kid.
Yeah, you haven't worked some soul deadening job for a decade where you're completely underappreciated and not free to be yourself. That's a good one to like wear down the the artistic, inspiration and just being alive.
Because we celebrate children's creativity, but once they go to high school or whatever, then it's like, no, you've got to grind down and get with the real world.
Yeah, get ready for going out into that working world.
Harsh.
And just selling your soul.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The great society that we have. Let's move forward then. So we've covered your process, so we're in the writing now. You've allocated yourself sensible amounts of time to write per day, and you said that took you about 5 months. Yeah. And you've got your first draft, so that's done. So then do you take a break? What happens then?
Yeah, so you put the draft away somewhere you can't see it, hide it in a folder so you can't look at it. It's very tempting to just go back and look at it and start editing immediately, but I think it's important to have some space from it. And this is actually a tip that Nikesh Shukla gave. He has a really great writing newsletter I highly recommend you sign up for. But yeah, he says put the draft away in a drawer for, a couple of weeks maybe, minimum. And then, you want to come back to it with fresh eyes and just read it through once without without editing. Again, it's very tempting to want to get stuck in and fix all of that horrible writing. But you just want to read it through and be kind of as fair on yourself as possible. Try not to get too bogged down in, how clunky it is or how badly written it is. You want to really just look at it from, a big picture perspective of, okay, what are the good moments in this? What are the most likable traits in the characters? What are scenes that really stand out as being strong? And try not to focus too much on the bad parts. Just very loose, big picture stuff, and just make some general notes as you go along, and then you can just start fixing or thinking about how to fix those big problems that are in the novel. Or how to develop the things that are really good about the novel. So yeah, I could see that there was one scene in particular in this novel that stood out to me as being very strong, and so I wrote a note like, okay, I want to go to that scene and develop it a bit further, because if something is really good, and I heard this advice from a comedy writer, like if a gag is really good, if it gets a really big laugh in the room, then just see if you can prolong it, see if you can pull it out even further and add more stages to it to really like build the tension before you break the punchline or whatever. So I think that's good advice, which parts of this novel could be developed further, really extended, really pulled out, more tension added, more conflict here. So,
Same's true of film as well, right? Because I watched James Cameron Masterclass.
Jam Cam.
Yeah, leg. He talks about that, and he does. It's a really good class. I highly recommend it. But he looks at scenes from his films. One of the ones was from the original Terminator film, where they're both in the discotheque scene, and he implements effects there. It's the first time that the three characters are in the same room. You know, we've developed the characters over the course of the beginning of the film, and then, you know, Arnie walks in, and you've got Carl Reese and Sarah Connor, and they none of them have met yet. And he implements slow motion and different techniques to really pull the time out on the scene. So because there's all this tension, right? So it's I think one of his principles for filmmaking is that prolong the tension for as long as you possibly can.
Yeah.
David Lynch is another great person that does that, right? Rewatching Twin Peaks, just finished watching the first episode yesterday of the second season that David Lynch directed, and you know, it opens with Kyle on the floor. He's been shot by someone unknown at this point, and the room service comes in. It's a great scene, and he brings him some hot milk, and Lynch just pulls that scene out for like an absurd amount of time.
Yeah, the old man comes back, like leaves and comes back 3 times.
It is amazing, and he doesn't help Carl at all. He gets him to sign the service bill, and hangs up the phone for him, and he's like, you know, it's fantastic. He's like, oh, you know, make sure you drink your milk, it's gonna get cold. He's a master of that, right? It's just like that tension, you know, he could die, but it's like, no, we'll just keep the comedy flowing for as long as possible.
Yeah, you don't want to give the audience everything all at once. You know, you want them to be kind of desperate to know what's going to happen next. And I think it's tempting, if you've got a really good story with really good beats, to just want to like give it all, you know, at once. But yeah, you want to just pass it out and prolong it for as long as you can. Yeah, so you've recognised these powerful points in that's
the
to do with pacing as well, and that's another thing on that first read through. You want to really pay attention to the pacing and think like, right, I'm going way too fast here, and I'm definitely have this problem a lot where I'm just giving too much exposition in one go, or I'm kind of like rushing through a scene. I mean, I'm quite a naturally impatient person, and so I think sometimes when I'm writing that first draft, I just want to get it all down at once, you know, and can move a bit too quickly through things that I should just prolong and be patient with, and, you know, just slow it down.
So that's a big part then. So coming into the second draft now,
yeah.
So you've had your rest, and then you've skimmed over the first draft, and then you've recognised where the strong places are, the sections that are most powerfully emotional. I'm guessing, you know, that make you feel something, right? When you read it, you're like, okay, oh, you know, it's pulling my heartstrings here, so this is where I need to focus on.
And you can feel where the energy is, like where it's alive, where the writing really comes alive. You can sense that very quickly, just as you can sense where it's boring, or where a scene is not working, or where it's clunky.
Very important skills to have, right? So I suppose you're embodying the audience, right, at this stage.
Definitely, yeah.
And so how does one develop this pacing, and so you recognize the strong points, you extend them, you recognize where it's weak, you maybe cut some parts that are boring, and then you're sort of sculpting the shape and the details of the sculpture at this point, the features on the face.
No, we're not at details
Okay.
yet. We're still at like the rough kind of slab of clay that's been shaped into something, but it's still big picture. And so when you're going into that first edit, you're just focusing on those big issues, like you say, cutting out certain parts, or just like resolving any big problems of logic or pacing, or just where it's not working, but on a big picture scale. And then with each draft, you're just kind of zooming in. So you go from the big picture down to like the medium picture, like, oh, okay, I need to rewrite this scene because it's a bit stilted, or in writing you may have got near the end of the novel and one of the characters has maybe changed somewhat, and so you need to go back to the beginning and match it up so that their character makes sense, or their arc makes sense. Because you can never anticipate what's going to happen. So there might be a huge change that happens while you're writing the first draft that you need to then, marry with the earlier scenes. With each, you might also need to step away and do a bit more thinking at this stage. It's not just sitting down and writing. It's coming away from it and letting these obstacles get kind of worked out by your subconscious mind. It's not all like conscious processing, because there might be a huge problem that it might take weeks to figure out the solution to. And again, you need to just be really patient with that, because I think a lot of writer's block comes from that as well, like wanting to fix all the problems in one go. But it's really important that you allow your mind to just work away in the background on those problems, while you're going about doing other things. And you might find the solution in surprising places. You might read another book and realise, oh, this writer has kind of done what I want to do here with this character or with this scene. So maybe I'll, borrow a little bit from that and use that as a way to help me figure out how to fix whatever problem it is in your novel.
So it's being aware and open to those answers coming forward to you in metaphor, dreams, stories. So you posed the question of the problem, and then you are vigilant in being aware of that answer coming to you. So is there an example that you could give us that where there was a problem with the novel, and then you didn't know how to overcome that obstacle specifically, but then it came to you, and how did that come to you, and where did it come to you? And
I think with my first novel, I don't know if this is a good example because it wasn't a very successful solution, but with my first novel, I got to like the second draft and I'd given it to people to read, and I got a load of feedback, and pretty much all the feedback said that the ending wasn't working at all, and I agreed with it. I'd kind of rushed the ending and it just was a bit of a failure. So I had to go away and figure out the ending. And because I hadn't done enough prep starting, or I didn't do very smart prep before starting, because I didn't really know what I was doing, because I was very much still a novice and I hadn't really fully figured out the ending. And so I had to go away and like think of a whole new ending. And obviously when I eventually came up with a solution for the ending, I then had to kind of rewrite the first half of the novel to fit with this new ending. And so that's kind of a bad way of doing it, because you're just wasting so much time, you know, if you haven't figured out how it's going to end, or like where the characters are going to end up, or what the tone is going to be, then you're just going to end up with a big mess on your hands. And that's what I had with that first novel, and it took me a long time to figure out the solution of the ending and rewrite it. And even now I'm still not happy with it, you know. So I think with this second novel, I knew the emotional ending points of each characters, and that was very useful. And that was, definitely a big lesson that I learned from that first one, is just knowing even the emotion that you want to end on for each character is very useful.
Yeah, and that's process, isn't it? Because you can't ever really know how to overcome these big problems without having gone through the problems, you know, at least once, maybe multiple times. I'm just thinking of my own composition process now, and you know, endings, as you know, weren't always the strong point, right? For a while, that was feedback that I was getting. It's like, okay, yeah, but it doesn't go anywhere. Where are we going with this?
Yeah, I think endings are hard, aren't they? Because you can have all the inspiration and the energy going into the first part of the process and the middle part of the process, but then it's like, oh God, how do I resolve all of this? All of this energy that you've built up for the idea over however long needs to come to some kind of resolution, and I think it can be hard to figure out how to do that. I mean, I still struggle with it.
I think it's good to start with those big problems, you know. I read, it was a TED talk that I saw of a burn victim, and he was saying he was in this fire and he got really, really bad, like first degree, I think, burns all over his body, over like 85% of his body. And he said that they removed the bandages and they did the points in his body that was least painful first. And he said it was the most horrific experience, and it was just agonizing. It was one of the most painful things he'd ever been through. And on reflection, what he said that should be done in that situation is that they remove the most painful parts of the bandage first. And that really stuck with me. And I think, thinking about these big problems, you know, and perhaps this, you know, you kind of just said it. It's like you knew the ending, right, before you went into it for the second novel, because I mean it was so painful.
Yeah.
In the first novel that you did, so it's like tackle those big problems.
And that's how you
first.
figure out your process, isn't it? By doing it completely the wrong way, and then, you know, saying to yourself, okay, next time I'm going to do it this way to avoid that pain again. And yeah, I think that's just how you figure out your process, and it takes, you know, it can take years.
Okay, great. Well, finally then, what advice, obviously there's been a lot of great points that you've made and great advice that you've given really over the course of the interview, but what one thing, words of wisdom, Jade Green, can you communicate to writers starting out their career?
Okay, well, we've already kind of covered it, but, you know, get over your ego and your expectation to write really well. I think everyone is a bad writer when they start, even the greats. And I think there's just this big kind of gulf of discomfort that you have to get through before you really start to grow and before your writing starts to get good. Not even good, but, you know, your writing starts to improve. And it's really hard to get through that gulf, and it can take years. And the only way to get through it is by doing it regularly and building those habits. And but you know, once you get through that gulf, it's just such a great feeling, because you have learned a lot of lessons from the mistakes that you've made, or, you know, advice that you've gathered from other writers. So once you get through that, it is just an amazing feeling. So just stick with it, I think, and know that there is an end to that difficult period of pain and discomfort. It will improve. And when you look at your writing and you can see the improvement, it's just such a satisfying feeling. And again, going back to the analogy of running, once you break through 5k and then 10k, it's just such an amazing feeling, because your body has got used to it, and you can breathe more easily, and you think, wow, like all that work I put in is actually taking me somewhere really amazing. And it is like a high. It's just like a really amazing natural high that you get when you can see the growth because of all the work that you've put in. So yeah, but you've got to be patient with it, because it can take a long time to really develop that process and make it through that gulf. And I think, it's an obvious one, but read a lot, because a lot of the big lessons that you learn from other books, or other short stories, or if you're writing scripts, then read a lot of scripts.
Any recommendations there?
Well, I mean, it depends what kind of novel you're writing. Obviously, everyone's got their own tastes. I mean, I love James Baldwin. He's definitely been a huge inspiration on my own writing. The way that he writes about emotion, I think, is unparalleled. But in terms of writing books that are about writing, Stephen King's On Writing is obviously great. There's an amazing book by Haruki Murakami called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, which, again, he's a very serious runner, and it's kind of a very methodical diary of his training schedule, but like under the surface, the subtext underneath is the writing process. And I think that's a really great illustration of that parallel between breaking through the pain of training for a marathon, and breaking through the pain of writing every day and making it to the end point of having a finished novel. So yeah, those are some of the best books I'm writing. Natalie Goldberg as well is amazing. She writes. She meditates, and she's been studying Zen for many years, and so her advice on writing is very spiritual, and I really gel with that. And I think every creative person should meditate. I mean, every person should meditate, but I think for creativity, it's just such an amazing resource. And there have been so many problems in my writing that I've solved just by sitting down to meditate, because by clearing my mind of all the clutter and all the judge voice and all of that bullshit, the solutions to whatever problems I have just float to the surface, and it's so easy. And if you're experiencing any kind of writer's block, meditating is just such a great way to find your way out of it.
Catching the Big Fish by David Lynch is a good one for that, right?
Yeah, that was another big inspirational one for me. I mean, that was what led me to learning transcendental meditation, because David Lynch draws purely on his subconscious. I mean, he uses meditation to do all of his creative work, and that's why it's so weird, because he just pulls directly from that shadow part of himself and that shadow part of the world, and it's just such an amazing resource. I mean, you've got this unlimited reserve of ideas and inspiration within you, and it's just a case of learning how to tap into it.
That was really fun. Fun to talk about all things creative with Jade. If you'd like to follow and support her, she is on Instagram and Twitter, also Patreon. And we talked a lot about running in the interview. Coincidentally, Jade will be running the Bath Half Marathon in March, raising money for SARSAS, a charity which supports survivors of rape and sexual abuse. Please donate to our fundraising page. All the links can be found in the description. Also, we've got some really exciting stuff happening on our Pivotal Slice Patreon page. For new members that join, you can suggest a topic and we will create a mini episode based around the topic that you suggest. So it can literally be anything, and we will write and produce a show for you, personally. It's really important at this stage that we start to collaborate with our network of listeners. So we thought this would be a really fun thing to do. You can access our Patreon in our link tree, which is connected to our social media, so please check it out. So, sending you all some positive, loving, healing energy for whatever it is that you are doing, and a big heartfelt thank you for listening and downloading the show and being here with us. It means a lot to us. So, massive love and affection. See you next time.